So, how to be more influential in a world that is tired of feeling manipulated by technology. I think this is even more probably uh, a topic that now that we're talking about things like ChatGPT, that has become even more front and center. So I'm excited to talk with you all a little bit. But first things first, who am I? Hi, I'm Erin. I am CTO of Marco Polo. Marco Polo is a video chat app that we focus on improving connection and helping people feel less lonely. I've been head of engineering at a fintech called Chipper Cash, and before that, VPE at Greenlight, at MailChimp, and I was also worked at an insurance company called The Travelers. I currently live in Atlanta, Georgia, but I'm originally from Connecticut. I moved south because I hate the snow and the cold. And I know a lot of my Northeastern friends right now have been the subject to a lot of snow, especially over the last few days. So if you love it, great, congratulations. If you don't, you have my sympathies. It's been pretty nice down here in Georgia. Fun fact about me, I have two horses and I'm a competitive equestrian. I'm not a good equestrian, I'm just competitive. I lose a lot. And I tend to dislike a lot of intros that go into a person's pedigree, as I think they're kind of gatekeepery. So I'm going to move on to something else if y'all don't mind. Like what we're going to cover. So we're going to cover today, we went through my intro already. That's history now. And we're going to talk about what is influence and what is it not, our historical relationship with authority and control at work, how Gen Z and remote work changed everything up. As an elder millennial, I am so glad that now millennials are very passe and we're all talking about Gen Z, passing the baton. How technology has made us suspicious of influence. We're going to talk about the influence equation. So also as a nerd, I like equations and algorithms, and if we can apply math to it, let's do that. And then how to create an environment in which you can be authentic and influential as a leader. And then we'll leave some time at the end for open discussion and Q&A. So we're going to start with influence. And if you joined today, you're probably interested in learning how to be more influential in your career or on your teams. Influence has a lot of baggage these days, especially of late with AI and how technology can be used, data can be used, and psychology can be used to puppet us in ways that we never really consented to. So I think it's important to define first what is influence for the purposes of this conversation, and then move on from there. So influence for the purposes of this conversation is the ability to have an impact on a person or an outcome. It seems pretty simple. It's also very broad, which means the topic is full of gremlins. When we think of influence as leaders, we usually think about how we can influence others to accept our ideas or our work, how we can influence people to work with us on our vision, but rarely consider how we ourselves are influenced. But we're human, and influence is not acyclic. So we will also look at ways in which we are also influenced and why that's a good thing. One of the first questions I had while learning about this topic was, what's the difference between influence and manipulation? And I can tell you after a lot of research on the topic, the answer is less nuanced than I probably would have thought. And the difference is largely intent. Is your desire to influence me predicated on your intention to exploit me? Or is it based in a desire to add to my perspective in some way? Is it to share context? Is it to inspire me to join you in something that we both care about? Does it flow in more than one direction? And so those are the things that we will talk about and how we can be more influential as opposed to manipulative. So why are we talking about influence now, and why is it an important skill as a leader, especially? And when I say leader, I don't just mean a people leader. I mean anybody that works with other people. And so if you're a technical leader, if you're, work on a team with other people, we're all subject to influence um, when we're working together. And how to do that in a way that's both ethical and also beneficial for the group is important. So influence hasn't always been something we've talked about a lot in leadership or management training. For the past 50 or so years, the corporate world has been largely driven by top-down decision making and authoritarian leadership. So authoritarian leadership is a type of transactional leadership, which we'll talk a little bit more in the next slide. But the gist of it is that in a transactional leadership model, I tell you what to do, you do the thing for a paycheck, and you don't ask me any questions. That is how my dad operated, how my grandfather operated. You went to work, you did a thing, you punched in, you punched out, and there was a very top-down hierarchy and sort of command and control. The baby boomer generation has been shown to be the most comfortable with that authoritarian and transactional leadership model. And these types of leadership styles are characterized by, as I said, sort of chains of command and decision making that's top down. A superior gives an order and their directs comply. It's very authoritarian, authority based. Interestingly, a journal article I found on the topic explained this type of leadership model is very similar to the types found in the US military leadership frameworks, and is, in fact, one of the many ways in which baby boomers would have been raised. So they would have been raised on a very authoritarian leadership style because they were born right after World War II, when their parents, who had been subject to those sort of same systems, home with them. So you had parents that were at war. They were used to this sort of decision-making style, and it was a big part of their life. They came home from the war, and they used that same framework to inform their household management and parenting. Hence, baby boomers who were raised on it, they have their disposition is sort of more comfortable with it because it's something they were predisposed to earlier in life. But the world is a changing. And so the newer generations are moving into the workforce. Gen Z was raised very differently from their grandparents. Gen Z, which is roughly anyone born between the late 90s and the early 2000s, studies have shown they prefer more of a transformational leadership style. They were raised by elder, or as I'm fond of the term, geriatric millennials, such as myself, or Gen X, who in rebellion against sort of this authoritarian leadership style of the boomers often took more of a collaborative approach to parenting their own children. So we're starting off bringing Gen Z into the workforce, and they are not as predisposed to do as I say and don't question it. So what is transformational leadership then? It's characterized as leadership behavior that emphasizes the growth and development of direct reports, and it's more collaborative and relationship-based style of management. So think of like servant leadership is something that comes to mind when we would think of that we could probably consider transformational leadership in that it's more relationship-based and less about providing commands and expecting them simply to be executed on. Transformational leadership has also been linked to social network theory. Both operate with the expectation of an existing and ongoing relationship, as well as what social network theory is, in social network theory is known as LMX, so leader member exchange theory. And leader member exchange suggests that leaders and followers develop unique relationships based on the quality of their social exchanges. And the quality of those exchanges within an organization can influence the quality of the outcomes. So high quality exchanges improve the outcomes of work within the group. Lower quality exchanges obviously do the opposite. One of the ways to improve the likelihood of high quality exchanges is the use of transformational leadership styles. So interestingly, one study found that having a good sense of humor can be a contributing factor during such exchanges. And they found a correlation between sense of humor and perceived leadership qualities by asking workers in the study to rate their supervisors on various dimensions. So in the survey of about 290 employees, I believe researchers found that those who rated their supervisors as being high in a sense of humor also reported greater job satisfaction and rated their supervisors as having generally more positive leadership characteristics as compared to participants who rated their supervisors in a very low sense of humor. That's not to say that you should all run out to your next stand-up and turn it into a literal stand-up routine, but it is good to know. Moving on, Gen Z also came of age with information at their fingertips. So they've seen a lot of the worst of society. When I was growing up, I did not have to worry so much about Instagram or Facebook or TikTok uh, or Twitter, and they have. And so they've seen the worst of society due to the sheer availability of news and the data that's online, and a distrust of blind obedience to authority is not super surprising. And if any of you happen to know a Gen Z person or a younger millennial, or you have, you have a kid that is considered Gen Z, and you tried to tell them what to do ever in their life, this is probably also no surprise to you. Authoritarian leadership simply is not going to hold up to inspiring a younger workforce the way it did decades ago. Leadership and management expert Ken Blanchard had said the key to successful leadership today is influence and not authority. To add one more layer of complexity to this delicious biscuit of difficult everything, is in recent years since COVID, people are working more from home. People are working remotely. We have more companies that are fully remote, my own included. And this is a ton of benefits, but it also poses a lot of challenges to how we connect meaningfully with our teams and our colleagues. Influence is gained through connection, and connecting truly to our colleagues and teams is now harder than it's ever been before. In the days of working in the office, you had the opportunity to create these sort of tiny micro connections at the coffee pot or in the hallway or at lunch or walking by somebody's desk. And each interaction builds a human connection. Someone becomes a person and not just a pixel on the screen. And so working remotely, those passive connections are harder to come by. Each time we interact with our coworkers is often a little bit transactional. You think of things like Zoom fatigue, and the transactional engagements themselves are very depleting. So you go to a meeting, it's usually for the purpose of getting a thing done. And those types of transactions over and over again, they're depleting. And you have to first build relationships before you can test them. As we know from last week, you need some social liquidity in the bank in order to make a withdrawal. Maybe that joke is too soon. So we'll move on. But Erin, everyone is online. So isn't that a connection? Well, you might ask me that in earnest, and I may say, why no? In fact, if anything, research has shown that typical social media has made us more lonely, more isolated, more lacking in meaningful connection with people. Worse still is really the use of social media platforms has made us more suspicious of one another. And so that in itself, the suspicion and lack of trust makes it difficult to form connections. So we question the authenticity of what has been put out into the world for us to consume, rightfully so in most cases, because um, when you think about the ways in which social media has impacted us, you're right to be suspicious. You're right to be critical of what's in front of you. Are you seeing somebody's authentic um, depiction of something, or are you seeing their highlight reel? Authenticity is also key to building trust. And that's trust is imperative to being able to have any influence at all. We're inundated with filters. In specific, I was on TikTok the other day and I found this filter that I could barely tell it was a filter. And oh my gosh, I was like, holy cow, this person is like a knockout. And then, you take your filter off and I'm like, whoa, man, I didn't feel bad about myself until I put this filter on. And now I don't want to go anywhere without a filter on my face. Um, but all of that affects our self-esteem. We're inundated with filters and advertisements and algorithms that are meant to coerce us into behavior that generates revenue for companies. And you don't need a machine learning background to know that we're not just influenced by the people we interact with online. We're unknowingly influenced every day by digital marketing, social media influencers, advertisements, and even as we've seen in previous years, things like fake news. Social media is largely built on a transactional relationship in sort of this disguise or sheep's clothing, where the goal of most social media platforms is not to build a relationship at all. Um, it's really it, the influence there is not about being used with good intent. It's being used to manipulate our behavior and thoughts and cash in on that. So we're rightfully so to be suspicious and to demand better um, from our contacts and the people that we spend our time with and who we build relationships with. So let's pause and reflect for a second here. What have we learned so far? Influence is the ability to have an impact on people and outcomes. What separates that from manipulation is good intent. Historically, authoritarian or transactional leadership models dominated corporate America, but it's changing as millennials and Generation Z move into the workforce. Influence is necessary to achieve goals and inspire this new workforce. And remote work and our growing suspicion of being influenced or manipulated, thanks to jerks on the internet, has made connecting with our teams harder, and that makes influencing them harder as well. So there are a number of obstacles in our way to becoming influential, but we can see that it's only going to be more important as a leadership skill set as newer generations mature, that we need to be influential and we need to do it with good intent, and we need to make sure that we are balancing and introspecting What are we trying to influence and why? So what's the recipe for influence? Um, there's a great book I recommend, written by a behavioral scientist, John Levy, and it's titled You're Invited. And he made a really very successful career out of understanding human influence and connection. And he provides in the book a very succinct equation that I found resonates with me. I found it to be pretty true. And I like, as I mentioned, if we can put together a formula, even better. Um, One of the things that um, Levy says in the book, our influence is a byproduct of who we are connected to, how much they trust us in that capacity, and the sense of community that we share. So influence equals connection multiplied by trust to the power of your sense of community. It sounds a bit hand wavy, but it's actually quite powerful when you break it down. And so if we want to be influential leaders, we know we need to create connection. We know we need to build trust with the people that we're connecting with. And we know we need to somehow create a sense of community, often in circumstances where it's really hard to create community in a genuine, authentic way. And so if I were one of the jerks on the internet, I would be like, that's it. Go forth. Be influential. I gave you the algorithm, and aren't I a thought leader? Well, no, I'm kidding. We'll break it down to each ingredient. And starting with connection. So how do you get someone's attention in their engagement? What causes people to connect with you? It shouldn't be surprising that it is not a LinkedIn request. In fact, a lot of research has shown that people hate networking, and that's largely because it is very transactional in nature. There was one study that I read about how research participants claimed to feel dirty after networking events. And it's largely because it's a short-term numbers game. You go to a networking event, the intent there is really about meeting with as many people as possible in a large quantity and casting aside anybody that does not fill a goal you have. So uh, probably even worse than speed dating. So you're meeting all of these people and in a very short amount of time being like, yeah. Okay, Joe, what do you have for me? You don't have anything I want. Okay, next. And you move to the next person. And if you're not a sociopath, that feels pretty horrible to do. And it feels really bad on the opposite side. So networking in its traditional sense is not a great way to form true connection because true connection is a long-term game. To connect with people, you can't treat them like commodities. And true connection will take longer and requires more energy to maintain. Research has shown also that we are all a little bit narcissistic. And there was a study by a leading neuroscientist that partnered with Hinge, the dating app, and found that people are overwhelmingly more likely to date those who are closest to themselves, up to and including, there were a lot of funny examples, but one of them was like, if your name is Adam, you are more likely to marry or date somebody named Anna. And so we're even down to commonalities on the first letter of your name. You are more likely to date that person. So that obviously adds a difficulty here of how do we build connection with people that are not like us as leaders, incumbent upon us to make sure that we are not staring back at a sea of ourselves as we build our teams. And so a good way to connect with people, there's the commonality of we are wired to want to connect with people like ourselves. And we need to think about where the commonality exists between ourselves and the people we want to connect with. So to start, we need to understand what people care about. We need to gauge with them on that. So that may be unique to each person, to a team, unless everybody sort of has something that they're really passionate about. Really great cultures and companies, a lot of times that thing that everyone cares about is the mission of the company. So in any event, maintaining and connecting with people on that level, it requires a time commitment. It is not a numbers game. It requires maintenance to continue to feed that relationship over time. And so if you want to connect with people and build meaningful connection, you need to think more about the quality over the quantity of your connections, and that you need to maintain them and to think about it in a more relationship focused way as opposed to a transactional way. The second part of that equation is trust. So trust, we can surmise, is the willingness to be vulnerable. According to Dr. Kent Grayson, who runs the Trust Project at the Kellogg School of Management, he and his colleagues agreed there are sort of three pillars that make up trust, and it's hierarchical. So benevolence, honesty, and competence. Benevolence is more important, it's weighted heavier when I decide whether or not I trust you. It's weighted more over honesty, and it's honesty, it's weighted more over competence. To put that into perspective, when you think about, for example, corporations love to blame mistakes on competence. So when you see a data breach or something horrible has happened and they are having to answer to the public or the news or Congress, it's almost always, well, we had these really terrible leaders, and they were just incompetent and didn't know any better, or we had these, the intern did it. It's one I think we saw on Twitter a few years ago. And so corporations are always willing to sacrifice competence rather than risk eroding brand trust by admitting a fault in benevolence or honesty. Think about it in a more human aspect. You can say, if I had the opportunity, let's say I had hurt my knee, I have a knee injury. If I had to choose between going to a doctor that I knew was really, really honest, was going to tell it to me straight, that I knew had my best interests in mind, really cared about me getting better, but maybe wasn't the best knee surgeon in the world. It wasn't their specialty. Or there was a doctor I could go to, and this person was the best knee surgeon in the world, but was super honest about the ways in which they hated people named Erin. Chances are I'm going to take my my risk with the former doctor. And that's just another way to look at sort of the hierarchy of how we weight whether or not we decide to trust somebody. And we like to think that sometimes trust comes first and vulnerability comes second. But I'm going to talk a little bit about something called vulnerability loops. So this is actually a useful way to short circuit trust building as a process within teams, especially you join a company and you want to build trust quickly with people. There is a scientific phenomena around vulnerability loops, which is essentially the behavior of I've shown my vulnerability to you. You come in supportive and act in a way that is supportive. And in the closing of that loop, we actually trigger the release of oxytocin, which drives pro-social behaviors in humans. So in practice, that may look like uh, I go out on a limb and say, I'm really struggling today with this bug and it's knocked my confidence. And I just don't know why I can't figure it out. And the vulnerability loop, that's the opening of the vulnerability loop. And your colleague, if they're a decent person, may say, hey, I've been there many times. That's a really tough bug. Do you want to use me as a rubber duck? Is there something I can do to help you? That closes that loop. And then boom, science. The release of oxytocin increases feelings of trust between the people. You can do this in your one-on-ones, you can do it in your stand-ups, wherever. It really is not a difficult loop to make. It's really, unless you're a kind of a jerk, the cost is not super high. It's really just not being a person that says, wow, you're still working on that bug, you must be a big dope. Which if that's how you talk to people, you've got bigger problems. So the next part of this is community. So how do we develop a sense of community? What does that even look like? So firstly, community is not just a being present in a group. If you join potentially a Facebook community or a Reddit community, not necessarily feeling a part of a community there so much as you've sort of entered a group. It's the difference between somebody that takes a few really nice pictures of tropical birds and someone who feels they are part of the bird watching community. A really great example of this is sort of like the con community. So people like Comic-Con, Dragon Con, those types of things. Those are people that feel very much a part of a community. And community gives us a sense of belonging. And belonging is not just important to the influence equation, it's actually extremely important to our mental and physical health as pro-social creatures. So there's a ton of really great research on this that is worth another discussion someday. But it actually affects our physical health. And we actually know that people that feel that they have good, close connections are less likely to die. Like your longevity, your likelihood of being ill decreases. So Dr. Matt Lieberman is a social psychologist that researched the impact of social pain. This is a really fascinating study. And this particular study, he tested people that were playing a video game. It was, kind of like a social video game, and hooked people up to this like MRI. So they're all wired up, and intentionally, while you're playing this video game, people were excluded. So like ignored, felt to be othered in some way. And it actually shows up in your brain. The feeling of exclusion, the feeling of rejection shows up the same as physical pain. It's the same feeling. It shows up in your brain the same exact way. Belonging is crucial to our mental and physical health. So, okay, Erin, don't beat a dead horse. How do we create a sense of community then? So there's 4 different things that help build a sense of community. And one of them is membership. You need to have membership. There are people who are in and there are people who are not. That's not to say like exclusionary but more a matter of, so for example, Python community, there are people who are in the Python community that consider themselves a member of the Python community. My mother, on the other hand, not someone that would consider herself a member of the Python community. Impact. Members have an impact on the community and vice versa. There is a cyclical relationship where the community provides value to the member and the member provides value to the community in things like this, conferences. where people speak and members get value and the speakers get value and everybody sort of gets some amount of return on that investment within the community. Integration. The needs of the member and the community are aligned. So I would, if I was a vegan, I would probably not want to be part of a community that focused on um, uh, farming animals for, I don't know, pocketbooks, whatever it was. And so the needs of the member and the community are aligned. That's how you create that sense of community there. What the people need and what the community needs are integrated. And then shared emotional connection. So a common shared journey or interest that members identify with or are drawn to or connected to. In the case of the bird watching, people that are there for a bird watching community, they very much care about birds and the practice of identifying them and learning from them. And that sort of shared passion is the emotional connection that that community is built on. For, the Python community, it very much can be the shared connection of we're all using this and we really, excited about ways to advance the Python community and advance the language, and how do we continue to create and innovate. So, how to create an environment in which you can be an authentic and influential leader. We've got our algorithm. Influence equals connection times trust to the sense of community. You need to establish connection with people considering what they care about and with a long game in mind. True connection is never going to be transactional. You've got friends over followers. If you're looking to have 700 million connections, you don't. You've got followers, you've got eyeballs, but you don't have connection and you don't have necessarily a community. You've just got eyeballs. We need to build trust with people by showing vulnerability and being supportive when they do the same. Remember that benevolent intent is the most important. Always introspect your intent when you are trying to be influential. Followed up by honesty and competence. Provide people a sense of belonging by establishing a community that connects and embraces them. That community, whether it's large or it's small, is where you will be most likely to have the most influence. So your teams, your company, your organization, outside of work, it could be a hobby, it could be your family group. We all have different communities and it's not all centered on work necessarily. So make sure that that community is connected by something important to you as well. You don't want to be part of a community and try influencing people that you don't connect with what they're passionate about. Do not try to sell leather purses to a vegan community. That's not the right community for you. And with those, I think, building blocks, you will grow your ability to be more influential in your teams. Start with intent. Focus on your ability to think about and build relationships with people, not just transactional sort of exchanges. So I will probably have Pam come back in to bring up any questions. I will move my slides forward so that you can also see my thank you here. And I've got my LinkedIn, my Twitter, my email. The slides have a lot of studies and stuff on them that I used as part of this. So if you're interested and want to do some research on your own, feel free to look at the references slide deck